This is our video for Monday, April 6th for pre-cal. So today we are going to talk about how to multiply matrices. On Friday we talked about how to add and subtract. And then tomorrow we're going to have our quiz over section 7.5, which will cover adding, subtracting, multiplying, and matrices. And I haven't quite figured out what direction I want to head after we take our quiz tomorrow. But I will let you know tomorrow what we'll be doing for the rest of the week. Right now, you need to have your books open to page 509. And when you get there, you are going to see a bunch of words. And it says the third basic matrix operation is matrix multiplication. And if you read through there, it sounds rather complicated. What I want to focus on is that matrix multiplication has to do with row by column multiplication. And it talks about adding the results. And so if you just look at this, it looks very kind of confusing and complicated. So the best way to work through confusion is to work an example. So I want to work example 8 for you first. And matrix multiplication is one of those things that has a very distinct pattern and method to it. It can take up some space just because matrices take up space. But once you get the pattern down, it's not very difficult. Now, we talked on Friday about dimensions. And remember that the dimensions, or your book calls it the order of a matrix, are the number of rows by the number of columns. Number of rows by number of columns. So matrix A has 1, 2, 3 rows and 2 columns. Matrix B is a 2 by 2. So I'm going to multiply these together, and then we're going to come back and talk some more about the dimensions. So I want to multiply matrix A times matrix B. And so what we're going to do is we are going to multiply the rows by the columns. Remember, rows go across, columns are up and down. So I'm going to take the first row in matrix A, and I'm going to multiply it by the first column in matrix B. And you do that element by element. So I'm going to take -1 times -3. So first times first, and then we're going to do 3 times -4, second times second. And it said we need to add those products together. So the first row by the first column of B, so -1 times -3, 3 times -4. So first times first, second times second. Now I have another column in matrix B, so I need to use the same row from A. Each row of A gets multiplied by each column of B. So I'm going to take -1, 3, and I'm going to multiply it by 2 and 1. Now I'm going to leave a space because I'm moving to a different row, so I'm going to leave a space and scoot over. So I'm going to have -1 times 2 plus 3 times 1. So -1 times 2 plus 3 times 1. If I had another column, I would multiply again, but I'm out of columns. So I'm going to move down to the second row and repeat. This is a very repetitive process. So I'm going to take 4 times -3 and -2 times -4. So first times first, second times second. And then I'm going to use the second row, second column. So 4 times 2 plus -2 times 1. So second row, second column, 4 times 2, -2 times 1. Now I'm out of columns, so I'm going to move to the third row and repeat, very repetitive. So 5 times -3 plus 0 times -4. And then I'm going to scoot over to the second column, and I'm going to have 5 times 2 plus 0 times 1. Now I'm out of rows, I'm out of columns, so now it just comes down to arithmetic, and this is probably our hardest part. So we're going to have 3 minus 12 is -9. -12 plus 8 is -4. Negative 15 plus 0 is negative 15. Negative 2 plus 3 is 1. 8 minus 2 is 6. And 10 plus 0 is 10. So A times B is negative 9, 1, negative 4, 6, negative 15, and 2. So rows of the first by columns of the second. Notice that our answer is a 3 by 2. So we did matrix A times B, rows of the first by the columns of the second. So let's see what happens if we reverse the order and we want to do matrix B, negative 3, 2, negative 4, 1. And we want to multiply that by matrix A, negative 1, 3, 4, negative 2, 5, 0. So we are to take the rows of the first matrix by the columns of the second. So rows of the first, columns of the second. So I would do negative 3 times negative 1 plus 2 times 4. But I have a third number in my column, but I don't have a third number here. I don't have enough numbers in my row to match the numbers in my columns. When that happens, multiplying is not possible. Not possible. So let's see if we can figure out what happened here. All right, so matrix A was a 3 by 2. Matrix B was a 2 by 2. When we multiplied it in the order A times B, we ended up with a 3 by 2 matrix. When we switched that around and we had matrix B, which was a 2 by 2, and we wanted to multiply that by matrix A, which was a 3 by 2, we were trying to get B times A, and it was not possible. So we didn't have enough numbers in our row to match what was in our column. So these numbers did not match, and it was not possible. Not possible. When these numbers matched, we were able to multiply it together, and the outer numbers were the size of our answer. And that will happen every time. The number of columns of your first matrix has to match the number of rows of your second matrix for you to be able to multiply them together. So first thing that means is that matrix multiplication is not commutative. Remember that commutative property says that if you multiply 2 times 3 and 3 times 2, you get the same answer. And so within the real number system, multiplication is commutative. But matrix multiplication is not commutative. You cannot always multiply A times B and B times A. Now, sometimes you can, but sometimes you can't. And if you can't multiply it, if these numbers don't match, then you just write not possible for those particular problems. All right, we need to look at another example. So if you turn to page 510, we're going to look at example 9. Because again, this does take some practice. We've got matrix A is 1, 0, 3, 2, negative 1, negative 2. And we want to multiply that by negative 2, 4, 2, 1, 0, 0, negative 1, 1, negative 1. So the first thing I want to do is I want to check my dimensions. So my first matrix has 2 rows and 3 columns. 2 rows and 3 columns. My second matrix has 3 rows and 3 columns. So I will be able to multiply these together, and my answer should be a 2 by 3. So this is kind of an interesting one to do. All right, we're going to take rows of the first by the columns of the second. So 1 times negative 2 plus 0 times 1 plus 3 times negative 1. 1 times negative 2, 0 times 1, 3 times negative 1. We're going to add those together. Now using the same row, I'm going to move over to the second column. And I'm going to have 1 times 4 plus 0 times 0 plus 3 times 1. And then scooting over again, I'm going to have 1 times 2 plus 0 times 0 plus 3 times negative 1. So 1 times 2 plus 0 times 0 plus 3 times negative 1. I'm out of column, so I'm going to move to the second row, and I'm going to repeat the process. So 2 times negative 2 plus negative 1 times 1 plus negative 2 times negative 1. 2 times negative 2, negative 1 times 1, negative 2 times negative 1. So first times first, second times second, third times third. Now I'm going to take the second row and multiply by the second column. And so I'm going to have 2 times 4 plus negative 1 times 0 plus negative 2 times 1. And then I'm going to take that second row by the third column. So 2 times 2 plus negative 1 times 0 plus negative 2 times negative 1. So I'm out of rows and columns, so I'm going to do the arithmetic. So I'm going to have negative 2 plus 0 minus 3 is negative 5. I'm going to have negative 4, negative 1, and a positive 2. So that's going to give me a negative 3. I'm going to have 4 and 3 makes 7. 8 and negative 2 makes 6. 2 and negative 3 makes negative 1. 4 and 2 makes 6. So when I multiply these together, I should have negative 5, 7, negative 1, negative 3, 6, and 6. Now, if you look a little further down the page 510, you'll see example 9a is the problem that I just worked. B, we've got 2 by 2s we can multiply together. I want to talk about D for just a minute. We have a 1 by 3 and a 3 by 1, so we can multiply that together. Notice that they have a 1. It's a 1 by 1, so we can multiply this together and have a 1 by 1. On E, they reverse the order, and you have a 3 by 1 and a 1 by 3, and they were able to multiply together and got a 3 by 3 for an answer. So those are interesting. To do D, you take your row times your column. So you'd have 1 times 2 plus negative 2 times negative 1 plus negative 3 times 1. Multiply and add, and that just comes out to 1. So matrix multiplication takes up some paper, but it is a very distinct process. So practice your multiplying. Remember that we will have a Zoom tomorrow at 10 o'clock, and you can bring me your questions. And then after the Zoom is over at 10:30, I will open up your quiz. Your work for today begins on page 515. I want you to work number 28, 30, 34, 36, 38, 40, and 70. So 28, 30, 34, 36, 38, 40, and 70. In our video tomorrow, I will have the answers to your work from Friday and today. And then we can Zoom at 10. And then at 10:30, I will open up your quiz on multiplying and adding and subtracting matrices.